Welcome to the market recap presented by Tackle Trading. Get in the game.
Good afternoon, Tackle Traders, and hello, YouTube. This is Frank coming your way with the market recap for October 16th. It's a Tuesday, and the day that we eventually knew somebody would start buying, and well, it was today. Very strong rally in the market. We'll have to see how it impacted some of our charts, but all of our indexes closed up over 2% here today. Pretty good slew of earnings. This morning, we had, Netflix, to point out a couple names coming out with earnings before tomorrow. Netflix, IBM, Netflix. I don't have a ton of time before the recap, but Netflix did have a really solid, at first glance, report. Looked like they really beat the expectations by quite a bit. We're trading up around 11 or 12% in the aftermarket. So looks like they are, certainly going to continue this little run of earnings. And what I'm happy about, personally, is, a good slew. We got a lot of earnings between now and then, but we're pretty good start. If we can get some good earnings, get this thing back on track, it's going to be a lot more trustworthy than it just happening, right? If there's some oomph behind it, quality earnings. Of course, we know we had a great earnings report or earnings season last go round, and that led to a pretty good run in the market. So check earnings or check Netflix on the open, see what it did, but looking like it's going to be up fairly good here tomorrow morning. Again, in the middle of earnings season, make sure you are checking and probably double checking those earnings calendars for all of your trades, because stuff can happen. GWW, for example, came out with a big earnings miss this morning, huge gap to the downside. Now, hey, if you were bearish on it, great, pretty happy. But if you were bullish, that hops right over your stop losses. It could have been pretty ugly. Make sure that if you hold through earnings, it is always your choice. You never want to wake up that way, right? But enough of earnings. Let's get into what happened here today. It was a really interesting day. Early this morning, I guess maybe an hour and 15 minutes or something like that into the market. It was taking a run. We looked at that intraday resistance yesterday that had really been kind of an area that we've been watching, kind of ran into it and ultimately broke through that resistance, kind of got the ball rolling, and then steam just picked up. And you saw that pretty much in the Dow and the NASDAQ, and in the S&P. The Russell did look a little different, because different as it has overall looked compared to our other indexes. But very interesting that we got that little intraday break to kind of give us a little bit of reason to think that there might be some upward movement. I thought that was a buy signal, but I certainly didn't expect the S&P to close above 28 off of it either. So very strong candle here today. Psychological victory, I think, on the small part in closing above 28. Well, I don't think there's any real technical significance to that. I do know that people like big round numbers, and so I don't think that's a negative. I think it's okay to play bullish, but I think we have to take some real perspective. We just came out of a big sell-off. Maybe it's one of those completely snapback, V-shaped recovery type of things, but that's usually not how it plays out. There probably will continue to be some volatility in the market. Certainly, we've seen huge candles now, both to the up and the downside as of late. You still have to be careful. You don't want to go chasing after it, but certainly a nice development from a bullish perspective going forward. Now, once again, we can kind of identify this low point. Again, it's just going to be a little bit of intraday support, but a little bit of intraday support down here in the form of yesterday's low. Obviously, a swing level down in the form of last week's low. Be careful, but I think we can be open, especially if we're trading into strength, which I think you always should be doing, regardless of what the market looks like. Over in the NASDAQ, pretty much same story, breaking through that little intraday resistance, spending the day moving up and up and up. And, one great thing, I think, if you're a bull at least, is, we closed near the tops. We didn't see people bailing out in large numbers, to make sure they locked in those profits before the market could, get them tomorrow. So showing maybe at least a little bit of faith from that perspective. We have a little bit of room to run, and everything whenever we're this far down. Again, we have to be careful, because in a lot of ways, all this looks like is a bearish retracement, right? We have broken support. We have failed at resistance. We have seen those bearish things that we've been seeing haven't disappeared on us, right? They're still here. So we have to remember there are going to be traders out there, whether it's the majority or not, we'll have to see, that are looking at this as a very interesting bearish retracement. Now, I think as traders, we can do a good job of finding areas that's more likely than not that that's what happens. And that's why we look at our sectors in addition to our broad markets every day, right? Now, over in the Dow, pretty similar situation, very strong close, very, breakout early and run all day. So very strong. Now, the Russell is the one that's interesting to me from a technical point of view. Of course, very strong day over there, testing a major, in my opinion, technical level. Of course, this old resistance level, breakout, came back, fell right through it. This is the type of area that causes this type of a chart pattern trouble, right? Where it's easy to move from support to resistance. When you get to resistance, it's a little harder, right? Now, we did it all in one day, and that's a pretty impressive movement, no doubt about that, biggest that we've seen in quite some time. But that old support slash resistance level should be a challenge. We want to be very careful, from a technical point of view, at least in my mind, on the Russell. Price-wise, this is a good bearish entry. Now, technically wise, I don't think that. I'm never going to go short after a huge bullish candle, just like I'm not going to go long. I'm going to wait for confirmation. Price-wise, though, if this starts to struggle, I think that would be a good potential bearish signal. Obviously, we'll have to wait until tomorrow. On the flip side, if we can break through that, that wouldn't change my mind to go bullish, but that would be a step in the right direction. We'll have to watch the 200 if that happens. If these falling averages, when you fall as fast as we did, there's lots of overhead resistance that we have to work our way through. But I'm not going to plan on that. I will always bet on support and resistance, especially as I'm game planning. I expect this area to hold and to push us down in the days to come. As we move into our sectors, this is where I think things can get kind of interesting. Over in materials, pretty much, everything rallies along with the market. It was a really strong day in the market. So, most things had a pretty decent looking candle by the end of the day. Materials, I have not changed my opinion on whatsoever. I still remain bearish within this sector, having broken through lots of support and stuff like that. I will look at this as a bearish retracement opportunity in the days to come. Obviously, I don't think it's here today. If it just gives it all back tomorrow, then so be it. That's how it goes. But I think that this sector is shaping up for an interesting bearish retracement personally. Over in energy, it didn't really take off today. It had an okay day, but it didn't really take off, but it continues to hold that support level. Personally, as long as that is the case, I do look at this with bullish eyes. That is certainly an area that I am looking and eyeballing at right now for sure. That support clearly is important, and holding is a good thing, right? At least if you are a bull. From bearish point of view, that breaks, that would be a potential sell signal for us. But again, until that happens, I'm going to look at this. These guys have really been sideways, and it's easy to forget sometimes that we get wrapped up in the day-to-day and, all of that fun stuff. But if you look at this chart, we're now going back, half a year. We're basically sideways, and we're at the bottom of that trading range, which, of course, these last several months has been a very good buying opportunity within that sector. Moving into the financials, showing nice little upward movement off of that support level. I still cannot get behind this. Again, this is just such a different looking chart to me, at least, than say the energy sector, where it has something. We are at support, but it's, I don't like the financials. I think they're showing a lot of weakness, although we did get some earnings that were fairly positive here today. I understand why people are coming in off of this price point. This is a pretty respectable level of support. We saw it fighting, the last few days here. I get it. It just doesn't. It hasn't convinced me. It has not convinced me just yet. Whenever we're dealing with stuff like this, remember, once things start moving, it's easy until something gets in the way, right? Or at least relatively speaking, it's easy until something gets in the way. So let's watch and see, where resistance develops. Obviously, way up here is certainly a very strong, in my opinion, level of resistance. I'm not necessarily expecting to get up there, but who knows? Certainly we may be able to do that. Over in industrials, a really strong bounce back day over there. Not too dissimilar from the Dow. From that point of view, showing some nice upward movement. Again, this one's a little weird to me because of where it stopped. Most of our charts, after that sell-off last week, stopped at places that made sense from a technical analysis point of view. I'm not saying these guys didn't. I'm just saying they didn't to me. They kind of stopped kind of in between support and resistance. To me, I read that as a sign of strength. Maybe I'm right to do so, maybe I'm not. Pretty strong movement here today, though, within that sector. The one thing I would bring out of all of this is if we're going to trade things, because, hey, my opinions are my own, your opinions are your own, we're all going to make our own trading decisions. If I'm going to trade into industrials or financials, things that aren't looking all that great, let's make sure I'm finding stocks within that area that have really good charts that are performing well. I'm not going to go try to pick the bottom on stuff because that's hard. That's harder than it needs to be. And go find things within that sector that held up all right and use those as the vehicles to trade within that area if that's something I want to do. Tech, strong day, similar chart to our industrials, really the same analysis for me. We have some room. We were very extended to the downside not that long ago. We still have some room before we get into these levels of resistance. So maybe we will work our way up there until we see signs of slowing down, smaller candles, things like that. I'm going to assume that that's where we're going to try to work towards. I won't be surprised if we can't make it because some of those resistance levels are far away. But until I start to see some sort of selling pressure, I'm just going to assume that's the case. Now, over in staples, definitely an interesting development, I think. Of course, after the breakdown last week, we have worked our way back up, much like the rut, right? Just like the Russell, where we had broken down and we're working back to test that old support as new resistance. This is a potential kiss goodbye type of pattern. Same real analysis, I think, as the Russell. If you're not interested in it from that point of view, I think it's important for you to see it get back above that before you get too crazy. If you are interested in it as a potential bearish play, we want to make sure we're seeing some signals because if the price is right, price-wise, I think this is a good place to go short. But confirmation-wise, again, no, not really. We're showing a lot of strength right now to get to that point, right? So it's important to make sure we're noting the two. This is a price. Now, maybe I see a doji tomorrow and see some downward movement on Thursday as a potential entry point. That can be fantastic. Maybe I won't get that though, right? But that price is definitely appealing in my mind from a bearish point of view. But certainly a nice little rally going on over there the last 2 days. No doubt about that. Utilities continue to be an area that does all right in the market. They did kind of sell off of their highs, unlike a lot of things, kind of petering out around that 54 range. Still closing the day pretty strong. We still have that overhead resistance. That is an area that we want to continue to monitor. But really, I think overall our chart remains pretty much the same as it was yesterday. We are showing some overall nice upward movement. We do have that overhead sitting right on top of us. If this market can continue to build off of today's momentum, maybe we see utilities slow down a little bit as they approach that level. But certainly nothing wrong technically over there. A very strong day in healthcare, as my thoughts have been this all along, that whenever the market bounced back, healthcare would be an area that would be interesting to not only me, but bulls as a general rule, because it's been so strong. Certainly had a very strong day here today, was one of the leading sectors in the market, closing above the 50. Well, again, maybe not the hugest thing ever, certainly better than closing right below the 50. So if we can build off of this movement tomorrow, I think that's really going to be the key. Can we build off of this tomorrow morning? Can we show upward movement? Can we break these intraday highs? Whatever areas that we're looking at, I think that's going to be something that's very important. And well, hey, Netflix having a great earnings report isn't going to hurt the chances of that happening. Discretionary looks an awful lot like technology from a technical point of view. Strong day over there, has a little room to go, but was showing weakness, relatively even before we sold off. So certainly one of those areas that I think, hey, if you're going long, you're going long, right? Whatever I say is just what I say. But we want to keep in mind that this was showing some weakness before the market started to sell off last week. So whatever that might mean to you, I think it is worth noting in your mind for sure. Over in the real estate sector, building off of yesterday's momentum, kind of dragging up with things. Again, for me at least, this is another bearish retracement area. Not particularly interested in any bullish positions or trades on the real estate sector right now. Again, much like at the discretionary, it was showing a lot of weakness, probably more so than the discretionary, in my opinion, before things sold off. To me, it was extended to the downside. It wasn't going to free fall forever. Then you couple that with a fantastic day in the market, it getting drugged along with it. I still think that this is an area that you look for bearish retracements in the next couple of days. You may disagree and you may be right, but that is where I find myself over in real estate and in communication services. Certainly, Netflix having a great earnings might help its cause tomorrow. Strong day over there as well. We are kind of testing. Well, it's not a huge thing. We don't have a ton of information, so I hate new charts. But we are testing that old support level that can be a potential level of resistance. So if we can push through that, that could be a sign of strength. If we start to struggle there, well, that was a pretty important price in the not too terribly distant past. So certainly a very exciting day in the market. I think a lot of people are just happy to see the bulls still exist. I never like when everybody goes too crazy one way or another. We don't have to get it all in one day. Would have loved to see about half the movement today that we saw, personally, to give us more room, if we carry through to tomorrow. But again, I only can ask. I can't demand what I get from the market. So very interesting day in the market for sure. As we switch gears over into our commodities, a little bit of a back and forth day in gold as it continues to hold this breakout point, but hasn't really generated too much steam just yet. But again, as long as we hold that 1220 breakout, I think your analysis is the same. You're either looking at it from a bullish point of view, or you're waiting for bearish signals because you don't believe in it. But I don't think any technical trader is saying this is a great sell signal right here. At least none that I know would say that. I don't think there are any great signals in it. But overall, I'm okay with it. It's holding the breakout, and that's really what's important. We see it. We're greedy, right? If we trade into a breakout, if we bought into gold when it broke 1220, say 1222 or whatever, we wanted it to take off. Of course we did. We're not crazy people, right? But it's easy to forget that just because that's how I want it to play out doesn't mean that's how it has to play out. Really, my fundamental reasoning is now that we're above here, we should stay above here. If that's true, we have nowhere to go but up, right? Nothing to say how fast it should happen. I know how fast I want it to happen, but that doesn't mean it has to go that fast. So continue to monitor that price point. I do think that most people out there are keeping a very close eye on that. And every day it closes above that is maybe one day closer to folks saying, yeah, okay, I finally trust it. Because again, like we talked about yesterday, this is the first time it's broke resistance in months on end, right? So you can forgive the bulls if they're not ready to jump in the very first chance that they get from a technical point of view. Now, over in silver, very similar situation to the last couple of days as we continue to go back and forth between the 50 and that $15 mark. Again, boring, but I think you're still looking at that 15 as the area that you want to see from a bullish point of view, or even a bearish. If you don't believe in this, that's a good place to sell because you've got a good risk to reward. Right here in the middle, whether I buy or sell, it's going to be hard to get a great risk to reward, at least on a daily chart, I think. So continue to watch those prices is what I will be doing. Over on natural gas, pretty volatile day, back and forth, kind of closing, pretty close to the middle. But as we've seen, lately on natural gas, it's interesting. The day to day, it's moving a lot, I guess is the point. And so sometimes it's straight up. A lot of times it's been straight up. Sometimes it's straight down. But we've seen a lot of these long tails or shadows or dojis during the course of this bullish run, especially since it kind of broke out back at the end of September, early October. I don't think anything has changed from a technical point of view. I think our support level is still down here about 315. Of course, resistance or swing resistance up there about 335. We're kind of in the middle. As long as that support holds, at least the current way the chart looks, I will keep an overall bullish grade personally on natural gas. May not be something I'm buying necessarily, but I will continue to look at it from that perspective. But the breakout holds continues to hold its own. Over in crude oil, another back and forth day, closing up a little bit on the day. I think, you could, we've said, last couple of days, I think you could call this a buy signal. Personally, I will maintain a bullish outlook on crude as long as it's above 70. That holds that old area that we fought with. Now it's also kind of lining up with its 50-day moving average to boot. We've seen some upward movement as some folks started to move back into it. I think, you could take a little more of a cautious approach and say, let's make sure we can get through that 20-day moving average before we get too excited. And I would understand that. But really, I think we have seen enough for at least the more aggressive type of traders to buy in off of this pullback. Now, was that a good idea? Only time will tell. But I do think, after Friday's candle, yesterday we had that upward movement, which I'm sure triggered in some very aggressive bulls, and then more upward movement here today. I do think that there probably have been some buy signals generated, at least for the more aggressive type of entry folks out there. And then lastly, over on the dollar, dip on the dollar, rally up, kind of closing flat. I hate this chart. You probably could tell I've hated this chart for a little while. And so we kind of look at it. We know that old 95.50 area that's been such a big deal is kind of acting as some resistance. We did kind of break through some intraday here support. Really saw a lot of downward movement, kind of closed right about there here today. I don't really see any great trade setups on this either way. More downward movement, I could understand people going bearish. If we can break back above that 95.50-ish area, I could understand folks going bullish. I don't really love either one of those ideas, to be honest with you, but I could see the case for that. So that, ladies and gentlemen, is where we find ourselves after, a day. It seems like it's been a long time since the bulls won. It wasn't that long ago, but it seems that way in certain aspects. So continue to monitor earnings. I do think, as these reports trickle in over the next, the rest of this week and next week as well, I think that's really going to be the story. I think if traders are cool and happy with those earnings, I would expect we get that Santa Claus rally. If they can't alleviate some people's fears, well, all bets are off, right? So I think the next week and a half are going to be pretty important as we look to close the rest of this trading year out. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, as always, it is certainly my pleasure, and I do appreciate everybody's time. If you haven't already, be sure to hit that subscribe button and that notification bell over on the channel so you can be alerted to any new videos that we're doing over here. And be sure to follow us over at Tackle Trading on Twitter to keep up with some of the things that we're watching and following during the market day. If you enjoyed the market recap, it is always helpful and appreciated if you do give it a thumbs up to let us know that we are on the right track. And with that, get out of here. Happy trading, and I will see you in the next one.